Great, thank you for that very thorough explanation of the interpretation function. Welcome everybody to today's conversation. I'm Jenny Hodgson. I'm with the Global Fund for Community Foundations, joining you today from a very hot Johannesburg. We're delighted to have three speakers join us today from Slovakia, Romania, and from Ukraine itself, of course. What we really want to do today is have a conversation to reflect on the last year, what's happened since the 24th of February last year, when the full-scale invasion of Ukraine really moved the escalation of Russia's intents around Ukraine that had been rumbling on since 2014 to a whole other level. So we're going to start by hearing from our three speakers, and we will try to get to the point where we can start to think about what more can be done, who else needs to be involved, what's working, what's not working. This is clearly something that isn't going to be solved in the immediate short term. And this issue of how one can get resources to those in the places where they are to support people to do what they need to do, I think is a critically important one. So to get started, I'll just tell you who our three speakers are. We're going to kick off starting to hear from Laura Dittel from the Carpathian Foundation, which is based in Košice in Slovakia. And then we'll turn to Teodora Borkov, who is with the Timișoara Community Foundation in Romania. And then we'll join Lydia Savenko, who's in Boyarka in Ukraine. So we're taking a little bit of a tour of the region on the way. I wonder if we can start with you, Laura, just to say a word about the Carpathian Foundation. I think of the organizations on this call, yours is the oldest. It established in 1994 when the world had gone through another massive transition. You work on it's a cross-border regional foundation that you work for, and I believe you've been there since the very start. Could you share a little bit about the foundation? And if we're doing this sort of in the immediate impacts of the war, say a little bit about what you were doing up until February the 24th last year, and then what happened when the war kicked off and people started turning up in your community. So Laura, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for the invitation and for the possibility to share our experience, and I'm also very eager to listen to other speakers of this meeting today. As you mentioned, I'm with the Carpathian Foundation since the very beginning. I joined the club in May 1995 as one of the first employees. I was a community activist, and I spent most of my professional career in the non-profit, non-governmental sector, and 28 years in the Carpathian Foundation, and the last 15 years I'm the executive director of the Carpathian Foundation. A very happy executive director, because during the last year we divided the leadership of the organization between my colleague Veronica and me, and we call the two agendas the Ministry of Interior and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I'm the one who is in charge of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which means mainly representing the organization and speaking at the conferences, doing advocacy work, and also do the work in different platforms and networks where the foundation is being a member. The Carpathian Foundation is a small team of people. We are 16 altogether. And it's a non-governmental, non-profit grant maker. We consider ourselves a community foundation, but our community is a little broader. In our context, the community foundation usually covers one city and the very close surroundings. We are covering Eastern Slovakia, which is consisting of two regions, Košice and Prešov. But as you mentioned, 28 years ago, we were an international cross-border foundation operating in so-called Carpathian Euro region, which is a broader European region covering bordering areas of Poland, Ukraine, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania. This experience gives us a very special position in the region, because not only in connection with the war, but also in other cases, we were usually taken as a local player having this cross-border and international experience, which is sometimes a very good and very, very practical combination. Before the war and before the COVID pandemic, we were doing our regular work, and our regular work was always concentrated around 4 major topics. It's civil society development and community development. We are working with a local active people, with local NGOs. We provide them grants, also training, technical assistance, and a lot of networking opportunities. The second topic is connected with one of the most pressing issues of Eastern Slovakia, and it's a very bad situation in marginalized Roma communities, where we conduct our early childhood development programs during the past 7 years. And 2 years ago, we started a special program working with Roma women. It's about empowering them, preparing them for the job market and for the successful life. The fourth topic is education. We are trying to introduce new innovative ways of education into the school system, which wasn't reformed during the past 25 years here in Slovakia. And one of our programs we are very proud of is My Machine, which started in Belgium, and it's a program which is now present in all 5 continents, and we are the exclusive partner in Slovakia. And during the past 10 years, we piloted the program first in Eastern Slovakia, and then we scaled it up to the whole country. And the fourth topic of the Carpathian Foundation is CSR development and development of individual and corporate philanthropy. We have also 2 cross-cutting themes or cross-cutting directions. One is the cross-border cooperation, which is deeply rooted in our DNA. And when the COVID-19 pandemic started, we realized that it is somehow expected from us to be a first helping hand in different crisis situations. So this is another cross-cutting direction which is present in our programs. Maybe for those who are not very familiar with the details of the map in Eastern and Central Europe, we are based in Košice, which is the 2nd largest city of Slovakia. Košice is only 100 kilometers from the border with Ukraine, and this makes our position in connection with the topic we are going to discuss even more special. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Laura. So, I mean, I think just a couple of things to sort of pull out from what you said. So, I mean, you've been around a long time. You've made grants to many hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations in the region. You've got this regional spread while having a geographic and national focus. And as you say, your identity of community is those on the call who come from other parts of the world. Many will feel very comfortable with the idea that community can be both a town or a city or a region or a issue or an identity. So that's really important. And that although you're sort of set up to deal with kind of crises, you're not a humanitarian aid organization, right? So do you want to just tell us what happened? Can you just tell us about the first few days of what happened, you know, relatively briefly, but some of the things that happened when the war started? What did that look like to you?
Maybe I will start with January 2022. In January, we usually have an evaluation meeting with the whole team. And we had that also in January 2022. And that time it was already clear that something is going to happen, that Russia is preparing something. And we had a long conversation with the other team members, how we will react if this happens, and whether we are strong enough and prepared enough to react to the situation. On 24th of February, we were absolutely clear that we have to help, and we have to do it really, really quickly, because the situation at the borders and in eastern Slovakia changed during the night. The border was full of people, mostly women, mothers with small kids, elderly people, people with disabilities were crossing the border sometimes with one tiny bag. And it was clear that most of these people will need every type of help you can imagine, starting from housing, food, medicines, medical care, and all of this. We were not at the border. We were not those who jumped into the car and went directly to the border, but we were very closely monitoring the situation, what people were doing and what the organizations were doing. I have to tell that I was extremely proud of this society. We were able to show a wonderful solidarity with these people, and it was mostly done by ordinary people, small local self-governments, small villages. Everybody was opening up their houses for these people. So well, it's important to say that during the first 10 days, 300,000 people crossed the border with Ukraine. So it was a relatively big mass of refugees who needed immediate help. We were, as you mentioned, we are not a humanitarian organization, so we were not preparing humanitarian programs, but we did three things immediately. We opened up our crisis fund, which only had 10,000 of euros. But we believe that this will be by our partners, because we do have a lot of supporters, a lot of corporate partners in the region, and we also have a lot of foreign donors who were helping our programs in the past. So we opened a rapid grant scheme providing small grants up to 5,000 euros to NGOs, local self-governments, and schools. It was very important to react very quickly, so we transformed all our internal processes, and we were providing grants every week. So it was a weekly decision-making process, which means that the organizations requesting help didn't wait longer than 10, 14 days to have the money at the account. And during the past year, we supported 48 proposals with more than 170,000 euros. The second thing we did, we partnered with...
Sorry, Laura, and the 170,000 euros, that was mostly raised locally or in the region, right?
Yes, most of the money was coming from individuals who contributed to our fundraising campaign, also from the local companies who are our partners for quite long, and also from different international donors. But the first money was really coming from the region. It was from here. The second thing we did, we partnered with two other small NGOs. Both of them are our former grantees. And we decided to start delivering humanitarian aid to Ukraine. It was actually during the first week, 4 days after the war started. One of these organizations has a humanitarian storage in Prešov, in the second largest city in eastern Slovakia. And as they were always helping people in need, they were prepared to do that, but make it broader and start helping Ukrainians. The other organization was helping mostly with logistics, and our responsibility was to find donors for those items which were not able to be collected from the people, mostly medicines, medical material, and special support to small kids, etc. During the past year, we delivered more than 200,000 tons of aid to Western Ukraine. It was we did it with 50 full minivans, and the whole support was more than 200,000 euros. The value of the support. More than 100 volunteers were constantly involved into, packaging, delivering, driving the vans, and doing all this work. And when we counted the time they spent during the past year, it was more than 15,000 hours. And of course, this was accompanied by a fundraising campaign, which was already mentioned, and which was feeding the two main activities of the organization, the grant scheme and the humanitarian aid. Maybe one more thing. There are many different organizations providing humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Only Umbrella, which is a platform of development and humanitarian organizations, has 24 organizations on their list, but only few of them are still doing this. And it's important to say that we are really starting our events every week, always on Thursday.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think for you, Laura, and for Teodora, we're getting the beginning of what happened a year ago and how things are now, which we're going to come back to. But maybe we can travel south to Romania. And Teodora, I imagine some of the things you want to share might not be so dissimilar from Laura. So if you wanted, for things that were similar, just say, yes, we did that too. But maybe you want to say a little bit about your response. Now, Timișoara is one of the biggest cities in Romania, isn't it? So, and the Community Foundation is established in 2016, right? So young compared with Carpathian Foundation, but relatively mature compared with the Boyarka Community Foundation, which was only established in 2020. So if you want to share a little bit about what you were doing before as a community foundation, and then what happened when the war started, that would be great.
Thank you. If I could share my my screen for a little moment. Yes, just to put ourselves on the map. So here is Ukraine. This is Slovakia, Hungary, and here is Romania. And Timișoara is actually at the border with Hungary and Serbia, so relatively far from the borders with Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova. We are a community foundation with a regional reach. We serve a population of roughly 1.5 million people in different counties of West Romania. And we, as of 2022, we had 12 funding programs with a total budget of 1.2 million euros raised only from the community, from the local resources. What we were doing before, we were very busy organizing the local services to respond to the COVID crisis. We spent 2020 and 2021 doing crazy purchases from PCR test machines from South Korea to 250 oxygen suppliers, like home devices that were used in a massive campaign called Oxygen for Timișoara. It was led by the local hospital, who said that the most important is to keep home those people who might be treated at home. And the interesting part was we never saw ourselves as community leaders, but rather like, gathering resources. For some interesting reason, dealing with funding, we also got this sort of trust that we know how to spend it, and we are very transparent in everything we do. So both during the COVID and during the Ukraine crisis, we were in this position where we were given the trust to put the money together. We also broke the emergency fund. We were a bit luckier. We had almost 80,000 euros in our account, but we used it the second day basically to start purchases.
Can I just interrupt you a moment, Teodora, because I think it's important also, I mean, that there is an extraordinary story to be written about Romanian Community Foundation's response during COVID and this issue of trust. There is a very high profile, a wonderful documentary film called Collective, which talks about corruption in the Romanian health system. And this is why it was so important that community foundations were seen not as the Ministry of Health, but rather as trusted third parties who could deal with a major health issue. So I think that issue of trust, which we'll come back to, I think is critically important. And as you say, 80,000, yes, compared with 10,000 euro, it's a lot, but still in the context of the crisis, not so much, but carry on.
Yeah, what is interesting is that the way we reacted was it was the mayor of the city that made the call on Saturday. We were like about 50 people in the municipality, and then he was like, okay, by the way, we want very much to support our twin city, Chernovets, in Ukraine, but you know, with public procurement and so on, we are not able to have a fast response. So, Community Foundation, could you please just do the organization for anything that is needed? We were in the mayors of Chernovets and Timișoara were in direct talk, and we would get the list of needs, and then we would do the purchases. But in the same time, we realized that the very first response from distance, as we were not so close to the border, but in the same time, we realized that our colleagues from the eastern border were already overwhelmed, and we started in the same time in parallel to organize the response to host people. What I would like to show an interesting statistic regarding the numbers of people who cross the border. We can see that currently in Romania there are 110,000 roughly refugees, and 115 are with temporary protection. Don't ask how these numbers are. This is the UNHCR and the government compiling the numbers. However, Romania was mainly a transit country, and we spent a lot of March and April as a transit. There were these corridors in Romania, and in the railway stations, people were coming with water supplies, hot drinks, medicine. There were calls in between the cities to announce what to prepare for the next train passing by. We also had, interestingly, we were dealing with a relatively large number of people that were turned back by the Hungarian authorities for, because of Schengen or whatever reason. Some people were not allowed to cross into Hungary with simple ID papers and without a passport or bureaucratic reasons. So we were mostly a transit country. In the same time, we had in Timișoara a constant number of over 2,000 people who were settled. And what is important is that we, from day one, whomever said, I choose to stay here and not travel further, we really made a point into avoiding the word refugee and saying that the new Ukrainian community in town. We have a historic Ukrainian community in the area from the Austro-Hungarian times. And for us was important to see the people coming as new people, as an influx of people with talents, of people with their own ways of doing things. And we were really, as Community Foundation, of course, we had this kind of first aid, like most of our funding locally went into vouchers for first response, but we also insisted to ask what are your needs, what would you like to do yourself, and we constantly encourage the new people who came, and we have amazing women with many skills and talents and very large visions who chose to settle in Timișoara and to get organized by themselves. And what is happening now is actually a lot of movement between Romania and Ukraine. We see the border crossings of almost 2 million people, and also a large number through Moldova, but we also see 1 million and almost 600,000 people or border crossings back to Ukraine. And this is a very, very important thing to say, because the people we are working with in Timișoara, they keep telling us, we are here, your guests, because our country is in trouble, but we are here as guests, and we are highly grateful and respectful for everything you do. Please tell us what we can contribute to your community, and also let us help the community in Ukraine. So everything that was, I mean, in general, we discouraged donation in goods because we didn't want to clog the border. We said, we only send goods that were specifically requested by our partners in Ukraine. Still, there were people who were donating food or other types of goods. And it was interesting that the new community in Timișoara, they were hardly ever using the goods for themselves. They were organizing smaller shippings with private cars and back to the people they knew in Ukraine.
Thanks, Teodora. Great to, I mean, it's just sort of amazing the mobilization that happened, the mobilization, the shift in people that have moved and across the border and back in the last year, but also that I think to sort of highlight that sensitivity around that this is going to be a long-term story for Romania too, and these issues of social cohesion, which I know we're going to come back to later in the conversation, are critically important about what you call people who have fled their homes because of a war. Thank you so much. Lydia, I'm going to turn to you now. Lydia is going to be speaking in Ukrainian. So if you might want to switch, click on the globe if you're not a Ukrainian speaker, and click onto the English. Lydia, I'd love to come to you. You are in Ukraine. Your organization is really a baby in the scheme of things. It was established in 2020. So you're established, COVID happened, and now you're in the middle of a war. We'd love to hear a bit about how you responded. What does it mean to be a community foundation, a young community foundation in Ukraine over the course of this past year? And I can see that your colleague, Maria, is also on the call, and maybe my colleague Wendy can post a link to an incredibly moving letter that Maria wrote about what it's like to be in the context of war in Ukraine right now for people to read afterwards. But Lydia, over to you. Tell us what you've been doing as the Community Foundation during this extraordinarily difficult year.
Дуже дякую, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Jenny.
So my name is Lydia Savenko. I represent Boyarka Community Foundation. So we are indeed very young. We are the youngest foundation that is given the floor today. We will only be 2 years and a half soon. I'm very grateful for being invited and that we have this opportunity to talk to such an honored audience together with such foundations who do so much for our people who were forced to leave our state. We are a typical foundation, a small one that works or operates in a small community. And on the one hand, we seem to be like a young organization, but when we were establishing our organization, we had some, experience of the community public activity. So I guess we just had to become one day the community foundation, which is a very working mechanism to respond to the needs of the community. For example, via tenders of social projects, and we are doing it for the first year of work, the COVID year. We even forgot about COVID. It has become obscure now. But we have established crowdfunding, and we had 3 calls of the mini projects in our community without involvement of the additional funds. So these were the calls that were organized by the community itself. Since this was during the COVID time, the procedure was online, and our donators, they were voting for the best projects themselves. So somebody submitted projects, somebody donated, and those who were making donations, they were also voting. So we are very grateful to the Global Fund because they were supporting us during the war, and they have funded the competition of social projects of the target audience of IDPs. This allowed to unfreeze our activity in this direction. And at the same time, this competition helped us solve very important issues of the hromada or of the community. And this was the powerful urge to development of our small organization that after COVID got into such difficult obstacles and conditions. So we would like to express gratitude to the National Network of Local Philanthropy in Ukraine, and we feel their support, and we see ourselves as part, of this community funds or foundations. So what has changed after the war broke off? Well, just like I said, we have worked only 1 year per our agenda. Then Russia made this full-scale invasion to our country. So we are placed in Kyiv Oblast. That's very close to Kyiv. And Kyiv Oblast, in the beginning of the war, was damaged significantly, and the citizens also suffered. But thanks to efforts of our soldiers, the troops, the of aggressor was stopped very not so far away from our town. So, and we became the shelter for those communities, for those people from those communities where the ruination and the damage was very significant, and when there were lots of victims. Bucha, Borodyanka, Motizhin, I think you heard all of these names, and they're nearby us. And when the war began, we had to, adapt very fast. In the first weeks, when the hostilities were happening near Boyarka, the first inquiry the people gave us was medications, because the most difficult situation was with people who had chronic diseases, whose lives depend upon the medication. And the logistics was violated. It was not possible to buy those medication anymore. So we started satisfying needs of those who needed them the most. And people from our community were helping us to do that. By the way, we had no medical experts among us, no doctors. So we found out and learned so much new things for that period, like what diseases people had and so on. And then when our defenders, they, managed to protect Kiev Oblast, we managed to focus on those projects that were aiming at solving issues of the forced displaced people. And the active community competition was aimed at that. And we're thanking to Global Foundation for that. But in autumn, when the enemy started, damaging our energy infrastructure and the winter was ahead of us, the blackouts started. So we created the heating points for people in the multi-storied buildings, and also we're tried to supply with the additional sources of heating. As there's also the center where we're providing the psychological aid to the forced displaced people. So this way we always have to respond to needs of the community. And right now it's clear that a long-lasting needs will be psychological, consequences of the war. And we are also, just like Laura mentioned, that they are not a humanitarian aid organization. And so neither we have ever had the aim of humanitarian aid, or plan to do it, but now we are doing it because this is the demand of this time now. We always plan to develop communities, the community activities, cultural events, projects with our entrepreneurs and for entrepreneurs, projects on adaptation and mitigation of the climate, so, and it's very touching that even during the war, those Ukrainians who remained in Ukraine, they respond to projects. They worry and care about the well-being, the culture, the environment. For example, in November, we were planting trees, and a lot of people supported us. We were not collecting funds, but we were collecting, these young trees. And a lot of people came out to plant, these seedlings, although there was criticism as well. And if you are interested, I can talk about it as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's, we've got a slight delay with the translation. I don't want to look like I'm interrupting you, but Lydia, the story, when we read how you, how you had made all these grants, grant making for the first time in the middle of a war, 36 grants, groups applied for grants, mixture of people who already lived in Boyarka and people who'd been displaced to there, coming together to put their ideas together. And the grants were in the range of around $600 to $2,000. It's an extraordinary story of how the foundation stepped in and played a role, brought people together, activated them, made them feel like they could do something. Can I ask you, how much funding, what is the size of your annual budget at the moment, and how much funding from within the community, from within Ukraine, have you received, and how much in terms of international funding have you received so far?
Ой, з цифрами це так. Це мені треба заглянути в наш річний звіт.
I have to take a look into our annual report to give you the exact numbers, because I'm not really good with numbers to speak up from my memory. But okay, so mostly during the war, the financing, the majority of financing we got from abroad, and we are very grateful to all donors and partners who supported us. but when we began operating, we didn't think about it a lot. Our main goal was to solve issues of the community with the resources of the community. We wanted to show people that they can do something themselves, that they didn't have to wait anything from the government or anyone else. So this was our main idea of our organization. But we have changed a little bit because the challenges changed. Well, our funds, they are moderate, unlike those that we got from the donors, because we are still very young.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I can see there are various other colleagues from Ukrainian community foundations on the call, and Daria from the National Network of for Local Philanthropy is also here. There was an article in the Guardian newspaper yesterday about how many British people had donated for Ukraine, and some £400 million has been raised for Ukraine. I think it's fair to say that very little of it has gone to directly to organizations like yours and the other community foundations here. So I wanted to turn to where things are now, and I know that Teodora at Timișoara Community Foundation, you've had an experience of receiving some international money, and I wondered if you would share a little bit about your experience of that, but also your experience which prior to your time at Timișoara, which has also helped inform how you understand and have seen the arrival of some international money into the context in Ukraine. Would you mind sharing a little on that?
Yes, I've been working in Ethiopia for almost 3 years in a development organization, but also very close to humanitarian organizations. And then being back to Romania and being in the middle of this crisis, it was interesting to recognize some patterns, and in the same time to recognize or to realize some discrepancies. And now I will describe how it happened. First of all, we had international organizations mapping support systems in Romania, what we call the local partners. And interestingly enough, the Federation of Community Foundations in Romania was identified as a trustful potential local partner, also for the fact that community foundations are the only NGOs in Romania that are audited every year. So from the sort of bureaucratic point of view, with the due diligence, that was it was a good situation. The talks, they started very hopefully that there was this expression, we are very glad to have partners in Romania that can fulfill the due diligence in a fast manner. And then we, in parallel, we were working, each community foundation had a clear mapping of who is doing what locally and what works and where still needed, resources are needed and so on. So we came with a proposal like, this is the situation. We had very accurate statistics of how many people were registered in the city, what kind of services they were accessing. We had gender, age data, and so on. And interestingly enough, one project that we supported was the vouchers project, which is the sort of humanitarian response. But the other projects that we were supporting were initiated by local NGOs that did not have particular experience working with refugees. And the projects were developed in partnership with new members of the Ukrainian community, as we call them, who got involved in actively shaping the projects. We are talking now about May, June 2022, which was quite late. I mean, it was after some months from the response we were providing in March and April. We had the support of these projects for until end of August, and then in September came the decision from the international partner that the projects that we are doing are not humanitarian, sort of. Basically, the format that we were hearing during the trainings were about, you know, temporary shelters, like really temporary. It was about livelihoods, or, I mean, I heard the term livelihood in East Africa, very rarely hear it in Eastern Europe. We were talking about how to properly do purchases, and we were advised not to be careful if we need to buy Toyotas or whatever. And we were like, no, listen, we never purchase vehicles. We have volunteers who do all the transports and so on. What we do need in Eastern Europe is a completely different setup of humanitarian aid, which is basically using the capital of trust that we already have, the communities, using this potential of mobilizing the local resources with the needs of the new population that we are hosting, and with twitching on the regulation by the national government, to make sure that the sort of policies and what it comes, they are well in place. And for example, the project on local schooling that was organized by the Ukrainian refugees as a support to for the children locally to continue the schooling system in Ukraine, and to strengthen the sort of support between different communities across countries and stay within the Ukrainian education system. This was considered as not relevant, or not the sort of project that would be relevant for the international donor. Bottom line, the support continued only for the vouchers after September, and even that was in a limited way. And yeah, we were rather disappointed of that, but we decided to continue simply by operating the same way we always do, namely using funding, or turning funding from other projects into the new projects that were in place in the city.
Thanks, Theodora. I think there's something really important here, which I don't know if we want to pick up in the sort of discussion. I'm going to turn to Laura in a minute, and then come back to Lydia, and then kind of open it up. But this, you know, your experience of being on the other side of the international development system in Ethiopia, and now being on this side. And on paper, you know, community philanthropy organizations, community foundations, women's funds, and others who know their communities, who've been working with their communities for in some case decades, who have passed money to them, build relationships with them, build connections, this extraordinary asset that was there in the form of local foundations, and somehow it being a collision between external actors coming in, worried about issues of trust and compliance, and used to doing things in a particular way, and not used to, I mean, seeing community foundations potentially as instruments to achieve their objectives, rather than real partners and peers with whom to work. I remember speaking to another colleague from your part of the world who basically said, if we continue to work with Ukrainian refugees, it will undermine our relationships with our existing partners. If we don't work with Ukrainian refugees, they will suffer. I'm feeling like that the whole balance of the way community foundations work and read across communities and, you know, work out who needs to be brought in, who's being left out, was really sort of affected by the rather blunt instruments of the international humanitarian aid system. And I do think there's work and conversations, work to be done and conversations to be had, because it surely can't be that this turned into a clash rather than a true partnership. But that seems to have been a large part of the story so far. Laura, I mean, talking about a year on, I think it's really important that we don't forget that there are other forces at play in the region. And when we were talking the other day, you were describing the context in Slovakia right now, how it had transformed from this initial extraordinary solidarity, we love Ukraine, and now something different has happened. And could you perhaps say a word about that?
Yes, and maybe you should go back a little bit to the times and the world before COVID, because COVID pandemic was something which really changed our communities, our societies, and in Slovakia, the first days of the pandemic were very similar, like the first days of war. Everybody was showing solidarity. People were helping each other, and after a certain period of time, everybody became tired, and this is happening also now. Although I'm not very happy hearing Slovak people saying that they are tired of war, because I think they all should take a vacation and go to Ukraine and see what the war is, because what we are feeling and experiencing here is not the war. So yeah, the general narratives in the society changed, and people are less ready to help, and they are not really ready to tolerate the attention which is going towards the refugees and people who are being helped by the NGOs and by the government. And this is also of course creating a very sensitive discussion, which is many times turn against the civil society organizations, the community organizations, and those people who are helping. On the other hand, I think the situation is also caused by the fact that in Slovakia, the government didn't do a great job during COVID. We were failing in many different areas. We had a large amount of death. The society has been divided around the conversation about vaccination, etc. So I think this is the results of this deep crisis in the society we feel nowadays in a regular life. Second thing is that the government was really not very successful in helping the refugee crisis in the first days. I do understand that it is everywhere, and this is the experience of the humanitarian organizations, that usually people and the communities are the first who are helping, because they are flexible, they can mobilize very quickly, and they do have all these live mechanisms how to organize themselves. Government is a little slower animal, and it takes a while until it starts moving. And because of the processes which has to be followed, it usually takes a while. But what I think is quite a failure is that the government in Slovakia wasn't really able to provide a significant financial help to the communities and the NGO sector It's been a year, and we still do not have some kind of compensation mechanisms to those who spent all their resources and are spending their resources. There is a new program called EU Care, which is a program distributing unspent European funding. And we finally came to the situation that there will be a call for proposal, which should be compensating those organizations who were voluntarily helping for a couple of months. And I think it's important to say that it's quite late. So this is also not helping with the situation and with the discussion in the society. I don't know if we will have time to talk about some other problems or obstacles, because there is one more which I want to mention.
Go on, you mentioned one more, and then we'll come back to Lydia.
Those organizations who are providing humanitarian aid directly to Ukraine are still waiting for the green humanitarian corridor. It's been a year, and in Slovakia we were not able to create it, and all those groups who are delivering help to Ukraine are waiting hours and hours at the border crossing. And because I have my personal experience once a month, it's something which is really frustrating, and this is also not helping the situation and the general atmosphere.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I think I'll come to Lydia in a second, but a couple of issues, one is, as you said, like the war is in Ukraine. Let's not forget that. People getting tired of stuff in surrounding countries. Maybe we need a reality check. But to go back to Theodora's points around, like, how can we just do this better as a system? How can we actually join up the dots between people in different parts of a system that's meant to support people in a much more effective way? I think there's a huge learning to be had there, because surely if we can get it right in Ukraine, it should apply anywhere where the same story is told, where local actors are just written out of the story, too often ignored, overlooked, excluded, and certainly not resourced. Your point too about the larger issues in the region and the world right now, which is to do with democracy and freedom of expression and forces at play. It is in the interests of Vladimir Putin, certainly, to have propaganda wars that seed these sorts of divisions. And so for those of us, you on this call, who are concerned around these larger issues to do with, democracy and governance, and, when the war ends, what kind of Ukraine are we trying to build? How do we set in place the places where civil society is seen as playing this essential role, holding government to account, helping to unlock resources from the community, from the business sector? I think is a really big question that we need to be thinking about. I wanted to come to you, Lydia, as a sort of final part of the formal part of the webinar, and then we're going to open it up for some conversation. But Lydia, speaking to this group that's here today, how could organizations, supporters, allies in the area around Ukraine and internationally, what kind of support would be most useful, would you like to see more of, for the kind of work that you are doing right now? This is your opportunity to tell us what you need, what you don't need, what would be most useful in the context of the incredibly difficult work that you're doing.
Організації чи країни?
For our organization or for our country? Jenny, is it for our country or our organization?
Either. However, I imagine they're connected. So you can start with the organization and then you can talk about the country if that's easy, or you can stick to one.
Добре, дивіться, все, що ви робите,
So all you do is very useful. Our team is very grateful. We are very grateful for the help, assistance that is provided by the EU countries, just regular citizens, the American citizens. We have people who are making donations from Japan, for example. These are just ordinary people who just somehow find out about our foundation. And those are not big funds, but it's a moral support which counts. And apart from the financial assistance, trainings, yes, I do think that we need to learn. And, trainings are changing our activity. And right now, together with other European community foundations, I'm undergoing a training on the climate changes. I haven't completed this course yet, but we already now are holding our, mini call for proposals, and we are deciding, so we're solving issues. And one of the components of this call for proposals will be climate changes. So such projects can be submitted to us. What else is important? Of course, it is very important. The cooperation is very important, because when implementing joint projects, we can learn from each other, we can share experience with each other, we can understand the context of each country better. And of course, we have a lot to learn from European foundations, but I think that perhaps we can also be useful for them somehow. I really hope so, that we can share something useful for them. So as for the country level, I would say that I understand that our president is really great, but the thing is that we still have problems. And these problems, they have to be under control. So let's put it this way. So there are certain red flags, because the war is war, but there are pressures. When they want to adopt some laws, when they want to decrease the level of local organizations, so we still feel some oppression. I guess this is the most difficult thing, and that has to be under control of everyone, both by us as the community foundation, and we will also be grateful to European partners who will pay attention to it and will help us with that, saying that financing is only possible on these conditions, under these conditions. And when the country is developing in the democratic direction, because we can have on the way out something, not something that we expect to have. That's all for me.
Great.
Can I continue? I would like to add.
Yes.
So I'm not the coordinator. This is my colleague from Ukraine. His name is Sviatoslav, and he wants to add.
Yeah, hang on a second. Sviatoslav, I see you. I saw Roman raised his hand as well. So let me invite you in a second. But I think Lydia, sorry, it's one voice in the translation. So Lydia suddenly became Sviatoslav in my ears. So, but I think that point, Lydia, about actually, yeah, there's the war on, but making sure that the overall direction keeps spaces in which democracy can thrive. And there's a much larger, longer term project about, protecting these issues in the whole region, indeed, in many parts of the world right now. And I think we should be building for tomorrow while we're, organizing for today. Absolutely. Sviatoslav, would you like to introduce yourself, say where you're from? And Roman, if you wanted to come back into the conversation, I know you had your hand raised earlier. You'd be welcome. Over to you, Sviatoslav.
Дуже дякую. Мене звуть
Thank you. So my name is Sviatoslav Surma. I represent the Community Foundation of the regional city Strey in Lviv Oblast. So we are the accepting community. We did not have hostilities. And at the same time, we see certain priorities that are vitally important to support. So our foundation, with the large-scale invasion, we have changed our specialization. We have started actively working on humanitarian aid, because via our community, thousands of people were passing through, hiding from bombs, missiles. That's why right now I would like to say that for the future, so we are, looking with hope at the future, that we will be able to help the wounded in the hospitals, especially those that can't move. And for us, we need resource assistance to provide services to such people who can't move, who are immovable. We have volunteers, but we need materials, equipment, and this is very important. We see that the forced displaced persons, that we have thousands in our community, they are still in need of products, food products, because their resources run out, their workplace, when the population grows so fast and becomes, more than, so they need to be helped with the food products and with the like furniture for their places of living. This is a very important humanitarian mission. Another very important aspect that we observe is the necessity during the war to change the country. We want to advocate a number of initiatives in order to simplify and to attract people to decision making on the local level, to have the influence, in power, because when the soldiers die for our state to exist, so on the peaceful territory, relatively peaceful, because the missiles also can hit here, but we of our government, and that's where we can have an impact. And it's important to develop activities of the community in this direction. And we are quite hoping that the humanitarian aid is not going to reduce, because we still need it a lot. But there will also be steps that are financed on the advocacy of the interests of the community, for us to accept the world European samples of coexisting of the state and the government, and to be the people who people wouldn't be surprised by. But when we knowing that we have corruption, but we would be able to overcome it, so that the volunteers who are saving the state today could have an impact on the decision-making process. So I would like to express gratitude to all of you that you so actively help us. Our small foundation, for the past year, we mastered 3 budgets. So this is a fantastic assistance that we were reallocating. That's why without you, it would be very difficult for us. So thank you.
Sviatoslav, thank you so much. I think that's a very powerful thought of the people who are fighting for Ukraine now. They deserve to have a Ukraine that is democratic, free from corruption, all those things. So while we're dealing with the moment of the humanitarian crisis, of the direct impacts of the war, starting to think about what is the system we want. I'm going to come to you, Ina, because I can see you've got your hand raised. And in a sense, your organization has always been thinking about these issues of participation, participatory democracy and things like that. So I'd like you to say a word, and then I'm going to ask Daria Rybalchenko from the National Network of Local Philanthropy to speak as well. And as I've written in the chat, if anyone else at this point wants to raise their hand, make a contribution, ask a question, come up with a brilliant idea, please be thinking of that. But Ina, over to you, please.
Thank you, Jenny. Glad to see you all, old friends and new faces. And I would like to thank Lydia and Sviatoslav that you told not only about burning issues, not only like emergency aid, but you started talk about development of Ukraine, development of community, and I also agree with this vision, and would remind that about importance of Shift the Power movement of Global Fund, which is now maybe became much more
important than before, and you see how it works. For example, our foundation, we continue implement these approaches in community, on community level, to help community to become more resilient. And also it's very important for community, for Ukrainian communities, also keep this resilient, I mean, developing even economical conditions for people, even despite of conditions of the war. It's also important to thinking about how we can help in economical development, in entrepreneurial development, or maybe social entrepreneurship. This issue which we focused on based on feedback from our local actors with whom we work. And I see things that it's also very important in important issues of international help to do. And I mean that small, micro business, because in small communities it is very, very important for different cases.
Thank you.
It's not all my mind, but
it's great.
Like to say.
And I mean, I think from the work that we've been able to support with quite small grants that we're able to move, this sense that people are already building for the future. So the work that your organization in Malada Gromada is doing around participatory decision making, the fact that Lydia talked about using a participatory grant making model from the very beginning. I mean, these innovations are happening. And from the start, the number of community foundations that were already thinking about growing food, thinking about winter, thinking along, thinking about how are we going to live in this new reality is so important. And that's that shift, you know, that it's not just humanitarian, it's also doing now for the future. Mahmoud, I see your hands raised, but before I come to you, I hope you don't mind if I come and ask Daria, if you wouldn't mind saying a word. You represent the national network, which for local philanthropy. Are you there? Yes, and have been doing some really important work in terms of advocacy and trying to get word out and say to the world, hey, Ukrainian grassroots organizations, civil society are doing all the work, people. So can you tell us a little bit about what things look like from your perspective? I know we spoke very early on in the war where, you know, we were trying to work out what resources might be coming into Ukraine, and you and your colleagues have done extraordinary work to try and get the attention of those with resources to direct them to some of your members and other civil society organizations in Ukraine. But what would you like to share with this group?
What I like to share, actually, that there is no any specific formula that you can support all initiatives that goes from local level and cover all the needs that goes from local level. Activities, is it humanitarian activities or advocacy activities? They would be really different, depends on region. And I know that many humanitarian organizations, they come to Ukraine and start to work according to some formulas, and sometimes these formulas are not so effective as they can be if they will start to cooperate with local organizations. And yeah, I can talk a lot about how it's possible to cooperate and what's the issue and needs. And I have 20 organizations in our network, and everyone have different projects and ideas. But firstly, like a big request to all international organizations that come into Ukraine, firstly, start to talk to local organizations who is represented for some time on local level. Before you start any humanitarian program, before you start any humanitarian reaction, just talk to locals and see what our real needs are. Is it blankets or is it seeds for their agro initiatives, which can help not only with food kits, but also with entrepreneurship activities, with food security, and with different issues which goes through war. War is not only about humanitarian crisis. War is also about human rights crisis. It's also about ecological crisis, and the big many different new projects that currently our community foundation is leading about integration. There is no program for support grant program or any financing for integration activities, advocacy. Yes, I talk about human rights, and also we should know that war influence not only on Ukraine and its influence on other countries like neighborhood countries like Poland, Slovakia, Romania, Moldova. There are many different issues with refugees, but also with influence of Russian propaganda. And if you will open now.
Oh, we seem to have lost Daria for the moment, but I hope you got the message of what she was saying. Basically, there's. Oh, Daria, are you back? We've lost you for a second. No, I think we'll. But this idea that these sort of intersectional issues, Lydia talked about working on the climate crisis, issues to do with social cohesion, integration. These are all interconnected issues. And I think, to me, what Daria's saying is the importance of networks. Is don't just come and assume there's no capacity. Don't just come and assume there's nothing there. There are extraordinary networks, this sort of mobilization of LGBTQI groups in the immediate aftermath of the invasion, that people know people and they have skills and they know the community. And so how can we get better at joining some of these dots between those coming from outside the country with meaning to help, but not that doesn't get in the way of and certainly doesn't do any harm to things that are already happening. We've got 9 minutes and I see 3 hands up. So Mahmoud, you had asked if you could take the floor to tell people on this call about something interesting that you're working on, and we're very happy to share more information about it afterwards. So do you want to say in a minute a little bit about Kujilink?
Yes, hello. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much, Jenny, for organizing this incredible discussion. And thank you, everyone, Laura, and everybody for this incredibly interesting and rich discussion about the war in Ukraine. My name is Mahmoud Bodani. I'm from Syria, but currently residing in Turkey. And considering that it's been a year since the Russian invasion has started to Ukraine, I'd like to say that my heart goes out to everyone, especially the people handling the civil society fight in Ukraine, or to all of our colleagues in the civil society community. Kujilink is a platform that tries to connect. I'm going to say this very briefly. It tries to connect foundation and funders with local actors, especially to achieve a better connection with a better and a direct connection with funders and CSOs that are local and understand the community, like you said, Jenny, and give the local organizations a chance to do the fight with the proper resources. I'm going to drop a dossier in the chat as well as my email. So if there are any organizations, whether they are in Ukraine or in other countries, and if there are any foundations that would like to get to the local actors in each country, please drop me an email and I'd be very happy to guide you through the platform and get you onboarded. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mahmoud. And you being here, you're reminding us that crises and disasters happen regularly, and solidarity and a massive support and empathy for what's happened in Ukraine, in Turkey and Syria right now, and Syria longer term. But I think you being here also and talking about Kujilink, is a way that actually we don't have to be stuck in a system where money doesn't flow, where connections aren't made. And so in the same way that I think Daria and the network have made those connections by introducing people, actually there are platforms, there are new technologies that can be mobilized to just make this system work much more effectively. So thanks for sharing this point. I'm going to come to you, Vadim, and then I can see that Maria has raised her hand, and then I think that will probably bring us to the end of the webinar. But Vadim, do you want to say a little about who you are?
Thank you, Jenny. My name is Vadim. I work with the coalition with INA, with different local communities. And I'd like to focus, of course, Ukrainian aspect is very important, but I'd like to focus on aspect of the donors who support Ukraine, and especially local communities. What I mean, the methodology which maybe Global Fund for Community Foundations said about it during years, as I remember, about shift the power, about how to take in account local context. I think that since the invasion, we feel how it is important to save a freedom for local actors to, to act as they understand how it can be. And I think that the main idea of this in practice is that we have like project KPIs, and then in these uncertain conditions of the war and its consequences, we have this level of freedom how to reach the best result, the ways how to do it. And we can, and this flexibility of the local teams, which provides by Global Fund, it should be very, very important aspect for other donors as well to think about. Because I see, for example, when donors start to cut the application form as their way to adopt their calls for local, but it is not, it's like to do the same, but with a little bit adopted forms. It is not the different attitude how it can be. And especially, I'd like to repeat it again, the freedom of local actors to find in these uncertain conditions the best solutions to reach their results, which their obligations during any project. I think that we should continue this discussion about how it can be maybe useful by, or just to draw attention by other donors as well. This is very important. And I listened from Boyarka, by the way, they also did pivot during very short period of time. And this is exactly because they have this level of freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Buddy. Freedom and trust, right? So, at a time when funders are making bigger commitments to shift power, to get more resources to local actors, still, like, how do we get better at operationalizing that and making it happen so it's not just rhetoric? Maria, may I invite you to say what you'd like to say? Over to you, please.
Yes, greetings to the colleagues. I really liked these topics of freedom and trust at the basis of the activities of small local funds that really are aware of their communities. And I'd like to stress that these competitions of social projects, when we have a competition for grants, micro grants, small sums of money, because we can activate the whole community, and it leads that the whole community starts to be active. We identify new active members. We have a freedom to do the easy financing of such programs, and these small grant programs and small human resources, we reach quite good results. When we see that the projects were funded, we can authorize these people, and we can do something in between, because the whole community, 10, 15, as much as we have, small groups, and with a very small sum of money and small human resources, we can cause real changes. And I again call for a small social project competitions. And plus, additionally, there is this opportunity to have the co-financing with the community members. When they see that someone provides money, they have initiative to participate themselves. And I'm very thankful there was a very successful competition with the money from Global Fund. It was a great, fantastic result. Thank you.
Maria, thank you so much for your contribution. And I think that, you know, what has been staggering throughout this crisis, this war, has been that people have contributed, and they have contributed money, and they've contributed their time and their voluntary support. And so often in the design of how we think of aid, we assume that there's nothing on the ground and that it must be brought from outside. And yet I hope the stories that we heard today really show that that's just not the case. And how can we better mobilize, harness these different energies and resources that start and are centered with people where they are, where external money can help build on and support and provide additional kinds of capacity building or whatever is needed, but don't assume that there's nothing there. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you so much to our speakers, to Laura, to Teodora, to Lydia, for so generously sharing your time and expertise. And I think we would be very interested in continuing this conversation, not just around the what's not gone great, but really, how can we do this better? How can we do this better in Ukraine? How can we do this better in other parts of the world? No doubt the same story will be told in Turkey and Syria in months and weeks and months to come about how local actors were sort of written out of the story. It doesn't have to be like this. Another way is possible. That's all from me today. I hope you have a nice evening, afternoon, and we'll continue to be in touch with you. And again, thank you so much to our speakers for their time today. Goodbye, everybody.
До побачення.
Yes, goodbye.
Bye, до побачення.
До побачення.
Дякую вам.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jenny. Wendy, bye.
Bye.
Thank you, bye-bye.